If I had a dime for every time that I heard that line in a graduation speech, I might have enough money to buy a gallon of gas, which means that I've heard it a lot in my time for sure. I'm not going to do any of those things this morning. What I would like to do is start with by reading you a popular American poem. It was written by Robert Frost, who wrote this back in 1915. I think the following year it was published. It became probably his most famous poem, called The Road Not Taken. And before I read it to you, it's interesting because I think a lot of people prejudge this poem and they think they know all that it's about just by reading the title. But it's probably not what you think it's about. And so we'll get into that. A lot of people think this is a poem that proposes this kind of rugged individualism where I'm going to be my own person and I'm going to take the path that nobody else has taken just to go to the beat of my own drummer. And that's not what he's saying at all, really. And so I'll read it to you here. So the road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, just hearing me read those words to you might be a little hard to focus exactly on what he's saying. What I do like about Frost poetry typically is he draws on nature, and I love being outside as much as the next person does, taking walks in the woods and all that. So he has a lot of beautiful poetry in that regard. But what the poem is actually about is our perspective looking back on life. We all have a lot of choices to make, a lot of opportunities, and so he looks at it as a path in the woods branching off. And he looked at one path, and at first he thought that the one was less traveled on, had not been taken, but then he sort of contradicts that. He says, upon second thought, he says, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. So he says these paths are really no discernible difference in them, but they look different upon first glance. And he said, and both that morning equally lay. Now, he's not saying that our decisions aren't important. They are. But he says the difference is that it is our perspective looking back on the decisions we've made. That's what makes us individuals. That was really the point of his great American poem, The Road Not Taken. And again, we're all going to have a variety, numerous choices to make in just a day's time. Some very insignificant. What am I going to eat for lunch? What time am I going to go to bed? Really not earth-shattering decisions. But then we're going to have some important ones, some big ones come along. Should I get married? Who should I marry? Where should I work? What should I study? All this kind of stuff. Should I go to church today? Should I choose Jesus today? All those kind of things. And as we look back on our lives and then take that forward, my question, several questions to consider is, are you prepared to make wise choices going forward, or do you sort of have maybe a personality that sort of wants to preserve yourself and my own desires, or do I want to do what God wants me to do and what Jesus wants me to do? Also, Are we prepared to admit that we don't know everything? When I think of myself when I was of age to be graduating high school, I would never say that I knew everything. I certainly didn't, but I probably thought that I knew more than what I did. And that was just lack of maturity. I had to grow up a little bit, as we all do. Are we willing to learn from the past? That's a part of maturity too. So a lot of questions that we can grapple with in life. Jesus, in Mark chapter 4, taught a couple different parables that we looked at over the last 2 weeks. They were about seed. The first one was the importance of scattering seed, and then the second one was about the power within the seed, that it can grow strong and much larger than what its initial size is. And so after that, it seemed like the teaching was over. Jesus says, all right, it's been a long day. I'm tired. I'm going to go to the other side of the sea, so I'm going to get in a boat. You want to come along with me? Everyone thought teaching is over at that point. Now we're going to set our focus on traveling across the sea, and then we'll see what's for us on the other side. Well, we will read in Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35 to the end of the chapter, what happened after Jesus taught those two parables of the seed. And when we talk about he here, the he is Jesus, to give you the context. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." May the Lord's blessing be added to the reading and hearing of God's holy and perfect word. So it seems like the disciples received the teaching and then completely forgot the teaching, or just didn't give any thought to it. And when I think of myself back, especially in high school, most levels of school, to be honest, I hated school back then. I did well in school. Academics, just sort of came easy. Didn't have to study all that much to make good marks, but I hated it. A lot of other things I would have rather been doing. Thankfully, and I'm not saying that's right, I'm just saying that's the way it was. So, the one thing that I waited for and was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard was the last bell on Friday that rang that said you're going home. Because I knew for the next 2 days I wouldn't have to worry about school, wouldn't have to worry about teachers, assignments, tests, and all that kind of stuff. And so during that weekend time, didn't give a single thought to what the teachers put in my mind and were teaching me for, the beginning of the school year. I sort of have a feeling that that's what the disciples were like. Okay, Jesus had a teaching session. Now school's out. Now we'll leave that there and let's focus on everything else that we have to do. Jesus wants to go to the other side of the sea. All right, that's fine. We'll do everything. We get everything ready. We'll get people loaded in. We know what we're doing with the sails and all this and that. Not thinking about the teaching at all. But that was the problem, because Jesus said, all right, I taught you something. Now I want you to apply it to your lives. But they didn't know that, of course. And so as we get into this, we'll see how all of these things most likely took place. First of all, Jesus was tired, okay? That shows us Jesus is God and Jesus is man. He is both. And somewhere along the way, I heard someone say, that when you read this story, what you take from it before anything else is that there's no bad time to ever take a nap. And as I get older, I'm thinking there might be something to that, but I'm sure that that's not the entire reason that we have this in the Bible. The nap tells us that Jesus was man. He got tired. In other places we read he got hungry. So what does that mean? That means he can empathize with us. He said, I know you're tired. You don't have to go, all day long, full speed, because God can do that, but a man can't. And so Jesus understood that. Now, his being tired caused the disciples a lot of stress and anxiety on that boat. Now, we have to try to put ourselves in the boat to see exactly what was happening. So, I have a feeling that there must not have been any discernible sign in the sky that there'd be any kind of a storm coming, or else they wouldn't go out there. So this squall, they call it, it popped up all of a sudden. And what happened, imagine that it gets dark all of a sudden. You have cloud cover, thick clouds, rain starts beating down. Imagine the sounds that you would hear. Rain pounding against the boat, pounding against the water. You'd have waves, and you have howling wind. All these sounds, it's very loud. We've heard all these things from time to time. And you also have the men screaming. They're screaming at the top of their lungs just to be heard over the howling wind and the waves and everything. They're trying to communicate. How do we get out of this? How do we make our way through this storm without dying? That's pretty important to communicate. And yet through all of the noise, as loud as it was, Jesus is taking a nap, sleeping on a cushion. I'm sure that would make me wonder and scratch my head. What in the world's going on? Why? How can somebody sleep through this? Now, I'm a deep sleeper, and I've slept through a lot, but I don't know that I could even sleep through something like that. And what I find interesting is the only thing that they say to Jesus, they don't ask him for help. They don't say, Jesus, wake up, grab a bucket, and start, getting water out of this boat. What they say to him is, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? Find that interesting. I think we have to speculate a little why they would say that. But I think part of it is they thought, we can handle this. It's going to be hard, and there is the risk of, injury or death, but we don't really need Jesus' help. But come on, Jesus, don't you even care if we drown? I mean, you're sleeping. Why else would you be sleeping if you cared? So in the end, what does it mean for us? Have you ever asked God that question? Say, God, don't you care what I'm dealing with? Don't you care what I'm going through? Don't you care what's going on in the world? War in Iran, child trafficking, all this kind of stuff going on? I've asked the question. Now, we can ask the question in a couple different ways. You can ask the same question as sort of a veiled charge against God, saying, God, you really don't care. So we phrase it differently. We say, don't you care? Thinking you should, and it seems like you're not. Hopefully we don't ask the question that way. But there's another way that we could ask it, where we are honestly asking it to be enlightened. God, explain this to me. I don't understand this. You must care, but I'm thinking, don't you care? It seems like you don't, because things still keep going out of control here. So I don't know what was behind the hearts of the disciples when they said that. I'm sure they were scared for their lives when they said, Jesus, don't you care if we drown? Again, it wasn't followed or accompanied by any kind of instructions or request, grab a bucket or, start lifting things off the boat to lighten the load, and none of that stuff. And so we can ask God that question, but to ask the question, it means you have a relationship with God. So what's your relationship with God like? That's something to consider. Do you have daily contact with God? Are you talking with Him daily? One of my favorites to always quote is Billy Graham, because he was able to say something very witty in a very short sentence or two. And somewhere along the way, somebody asked him why he is so confident that God exists. And in common Billy Graham fashion, Billy Graham said, "I'm confident God exists because I talked to Him this morning." And I love the way that he says that. So my question here, before you got to church, have you talked to God? You know, if He's our Father and if we're His children, and if you live with your father or your parents, you know, wouldn't there be some kind of contact? You know, I'm getting up, I'm going to church. Hey, God, you know, what do we have going on today? Oh, we're going to church. After that, we're going to lunch. We're doing this, we're doing that. So hopefully we have a good relationship, a constant relationship with God. Now, there's something else in this story that I had not really given a lot of thought to until I really studied it in depth. And to me, once I saw it, it really jumped out at me all of a sudden. And it's in, rather than go back through my slides, in verse 36, there's a little sentence in there that if you would take this sentence out, it would not change the meaning of the story, but it's in there, so it makes me think it's there for a reason. And it says there were also other boats with him. I thought, okay, well, why is that even in there? What does that matter? This is such a compelling story that we're focused on the main characters. There's Jesus and there's disciples. We get this idea, that's all that there is. Now, the Sea of Galilee's pretty big for a sea. I think somebody said, I looked it up, 13 miles long by like 8 miles the other way. So it's a pretty good sized body of water. They're not the only boat out there. Okay, so all the time there would be boats out there. And so Mark makes it clear to include the detail that there were other boats there with him. Okay, well, why is he telling us that? I think a couple reasons. For one thing, we don't talk about these other boats because we're not focused on them. But we see that the storm didn't just affect one boat. It wasn't just the disciples. And when that storm popped up, we see certainly it impacted all these other boats too. There's a concept in theology that's very simple to understand. We call it common grace. And it's just what it sounds like, where if God gives a certain type of grace, if it's not just for believers, if anybody can partake of it, then it's common to everybody. This afternoon, if you say it's a really nice day out, I want to enjoy it, I'll get a lawn chair and I'll sit and I'll read a book. Well, you don't have to be a believer to enjoy that. That nice day is for everybody. You can have a hardened atheist out there and they're still enjoying God's common grace. That's what we mean there. So what happens in this story is that once Jesus finally calms the storm, that's common grace for everyone around, not just one boat. It's not like a hole opens up above them and then that's calm and everything around is still storming. It doesn't work like that. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if you are on one of the other boats, you have no clue that Jesus is out there. You might not even know who this guy named Jesus is at this point. Maybe you've heard of a miracle worker, whatever, but you don't know if he's here or if he's, 10 miles down the road. So all of a sudden, storm pops up like everything else. It's loud, it's rainy, windy, waves crashing and pounding and all that. And they're doing what everybody else is doing. They're trying to survive. They're trying to get water out of the boat, maybe lighten the load, and all of a sudden, it stops. And it's calm. Never saw that happen before. And so they don't know that they just witnessed a miracle. So eventually they make their way to shore. And how long do you think it took for the word to start spreading among the people that this guy named Jesus He was out there, and apparently he spoke to the wind and it stopped. And they're thinking, I was out there too when that happened. Wow, I didn't even know how that happened. And there must be something to this guy Jesus. I got to find out more about him. That's the thing there. I remember when I was 18, up to when I was 18, I'll put it that way, I wasn't a believer. I knew there was a God. I accepted the fact that Jesus lived and he was a good guy and, he's there to save me from my sins. But knowing facts about him versus actually having the relationship, that's different. That's what happened when I was 18. The light came on finally, and then I gave my life to him. And that's sort of like I was one of the people in the other boats. Oh, great. Jesus did something, I benefited from it, and life is good. No, life isn't good because you don't know him. You know about him, but you don't know him. So I think that's a lot of what's combined in that sentence, that little sentence saying that there were other boats out there with him. Because this wasn't just for the church. It's not just for the disciples. Jesus' impact is felt everywhere in the world, and then it's up for us to make that decision if it's something we want to be a part of. Now, Jesus, the reason they're even out on the boat to begin with is Jesus invited them on a journey. He said, hey, let's go to the other side of the sea. That's not a command. The command is go to the other side of the sea. He said, let's go. It's a suggestion. So it was their choice. Do they want to go along or not? So the question for us is the same exact thing. Jesus invites us on a journey. Do we want to go or not? I choose to go along with Jesus. When I was 18, I chose that, and each day since then, I have as well. What we see through this, there's so much more always than what we can share in a Sunday morning. But whether you, again, going back to the theme of graduation that sort of started this whole thing, whether you're a recent graduate or you graduated 50 or more years ago, 60 years ago, whatever it is, Mark 4 makes it clear that all the things that we work for in life, our degree, our achievements, our wealth, positions of authority that we have, all those things, they're fine and they're generally well and good, not good or bad specifically. None of those things can calm a storm. There's one who can, and that of course is Jesus. And if I go back to Robert Frost in the beginning, his poem, The Road Not Taken, a lot of people call it The Road Less Traveled, but it's titled The Road Not Taken. I would encourage everyone, as long as you're here, that means God has a future for you. And if he has a future, there's going to be choices to make. When you have those choices, which path are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the one that sort of makes me assert my individualism, and this one looks like this hasn't been trod and traveled as much, just to say that I'm going by the beat of my own drummer? Or are you going to go on whichever path it is where God leads you? That's something to think of. When I think of, I'll say the young generation, I'll say teens and 20s just to sort of ballpark it. My opinion on this really hasn't changed since I was that age. And part of the way that I'm wired and God made me, I guess. But I was never one to really assert my rugged individualism. And I see, and no matter what era, so many people, they try to do that with so many different ways. I want to live a different lifestyle that people know that I'm different. I want to wear different clothes. They're ripped up. You'd swear that somebody ran over them with a lawnmower. Or they have hair every color under the rainbow, and they go to such an extent to prove that they're an individual, And I understand that. That's okay. That's neither good nor bad in and of itself. But my encouragement would be, if you want to be an individual, then commit your life to following Jesus. And what I have found is that that is too extreme for most people. I can dress different, I can do all sorts of stuff, I can look different in every way you can think of, but that's pretty extreme to be selling out my whole life just to follow Jesus. And some people say that's way too extreme. If that's the case, I'm okay being called extreme, because that's what I want to do. I don't get there, but hopefully I'm on the path anyway. And so, why have I chosen to follow Jesus? Because he's proved himself time and again. He's proved that he has authority. In Mark 4, he has authority over nature. Okay, I don't know anyone else who can or ever has calmed a storm with just his voice after sleeping through it. So that means something to me. And I know that in life I'm going to have hard times. If God gives me enough more days, more hard times are going to come. That's life. But we learn from this that the disciples, when they were on the boat with Jesus, they still went through a hardship. They went through the storm. So you will hear people from time to time say, come to Jesus, everything will be great and calm and perfect. That's a lie. But the fact is, they got through the storm with Jesus in the same boat because they chose to travel with him in that boat, if we can use that metaphor. A lot of times, the hard times in life are not evidence that God is not with you. It's actually evidence that he is with you because of the way that you get through it with him. And so as I try to close it up, wrap it up, you'll find yourself on a lot of different paths in life. Some will be more trodden and trodden down, and others not so much. They might be more like the road not taken. It doesn't matter, though, the nature of the trail. It's who's with you on the trail. And if you have that relationship with Jesus, that every day you wake up and you talk to God and you know who he is and you feel confident in that, you can rest assured knowing you're never going to be alone no matter what. It might be a brand new path that nobody's ever gone on, but you're not alone because he's there with you. And so every day you can simply wake up confident in knowing that there's no storm that you can't make it through as long as Jesus is with you. So let's bow our heads now and go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together, and it's season of graduation, but a lot of those graduation speeches, they speak to us even if we graduate a long time ago. And so, God, we pray that your Holy Spirit would inspire us this day, give us the ability to remember your word and to internalize it in our lives and to apply what we read practically to our lives too. We can put ourselves in the shoes of the disciples. We can put ourselves in the shoes of the people in the other boats out there that we might not even have thought of before, and see how all that shines a light back onto you, God. That if we were one in a boat without Jesus, well, we want to make sure that we get in a boat with him the next time. And if we are in a boat with Jesus, we know that he's the one that we can put our trust in because he has authority over the entire world, over nature, and everything that you created. So God, we ask that you would be with us this week as we leave this place and wake up confidently, knowing that there's no storm that we can't get through as long as you are there with us. So we thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.